everyone, and welcome to Spaminar, the Society of Prop Managers web series for live theater prop professionals. I'm Jen McClure, SPAM member and the prop supervisor at the Yale Rep Theater. SPAM, for short, is the Society of Prop Managers, and it got its start back in 1994 when a small but mighty group of prop folks in the Midwest came together to tackle some shared challenges and make sure props had a seat at the table alongside other production departments. Fast forward to today, and we're a thriving group of over 150 professional prop managers and educators from theaters, opera companies, and schools, all connected through an international network. We share resources, swap tips, troubleshoot problems, and support each other with everything from safety, info, and continuing education. Like our past seminars, tonight's session is a pay what you can. So any donations go directly to supporting these programs and our annual grant for early career prop professionals. If you're able to chip in, we'll drop a link in the chat. Every bit helps, and we're super grateful for your support. The live transcription is on for today's webinar, so if you can follow along in real time. And we're also recording our talk, and we'll share it later on our YouTube channel. All right, so let's get into why we're all here. Be honest, do you ever doubt yourself in your own workplace? Here's the thing, almost every artist, no matter the medium, wrestles with feeling like they don't measure up. You're not alone in that, and today we're naming it head on. Our panelists are going to dig into imposter syndrome as it shows up for us specifically as prop creators, and more importantly, how to talk back to that inner critic so you can keep moving forward with some determination and curiosity. As we go along, feel free to drop your questions in the chat. We'll leave plenty of time for questions and discussion, and I'll be monitoring those as we go. So I'll let each of our folks here introduce themselves in a moment, but a huge thank you to Sarah, Ashley, Jesse, and Larry for being here to have this conversation. Sarah, why don't you kick us off?
Thank you, Jen. Well, I am a freelance properties and scenic designer based in Minneapolis currently. I have over 15 years of experience, and I've worked as a properties manager for Stages St. Louis and the Phoenix Theater Company in Phoenix. And I've also worked Broadway, off-Broadway, regional theaters, many different places across the country. I also am a costume designer, a scenic painter, and a sketchbook artist. So, as someone who loves many aspects of creating art, I have stepped into new territory a lot throughout my career. And I know a thing or two about that inner critic pops up inside your head. So, as theater artists, we are constantly learning new ways of doing things, especially in props, where we have to have many different skills in order to do our job. So, for example, I consider myself highly skilled at scenic painting and detail-oriented tasks that require a designer eye, like set dressing. But two areas that I often have to ask for help with are electronics and upholstery. So, just to give you an idea that we all have things that we know we need to work on and that we're good at. So that's what we're going to talk about today. I'll pass it over to Jesse.
Hi, I'm Jessie Gaffney. I am currently the props manager at Chicago Shakespeare Theater. I've also worked at the Paramount Theater in the Chicago region, the Goodman, and many of the Chicago storefront theaters around the area. I find I am particularly good at research and communication, storytelling, and carpentry. And then I struggle with paper props and Photoshop work. And I struggle with actually what Sarah's great with, the scenic painting and those texturing things. That's not a skill that I feel very strong about when it comes up. So I will pass to Ashley.
Hi, I'm Ashley Crockett. I am the prop supervisor at the University of Cincinnati, CCM, College Conservatory, Music. I have also worked New York, DC, Actors Theater of Louisville. I was the master carpenter for a while in a previous life. Before I switched over to props entirely, I was a TD and master carpenter. So that's where I, skill-wise, still like always gravitate towards those kind of projects. Um, but I also, really excel mold making and casting, and that those are just like, those A plus B equals C, right? Kind of things. And again, I also struggle with the abstract of the painting, right? Painting textures, those kind of things. Yeah, it just doesn't always compute in my brain. I'm getting better at electronics, but I always do check in with my electronics friends before I proceed so I don't burn anything down. Larry?
Hi, thanks. My name is Larry Heyman. I'm currently with Kent State University as a visiting assistant professor of design, but I have over 30 years of experience working in theater, film, television, and commercial production. And I've worked at just a ton of places, the Goodman, the La Jolla Playhouse, the Huntington Theater, WGBH Boston, Paramount Pictures, and so on. And I have to say that, in terms of what I think I do well, I think I'm a pretty good set dresser and set decorator. I work well with details. I work really well with details of things like paper props. And one of the places where I sort of fall a little short is with upholstery, and soft goods in general. And probably, I mean, I like casting and mold making, but I'm constantly standing back and looking over my own shoulder and going, really? Is that what you're going to do now? So, and I have to say that no matter how well I feel I do with things, I'm always constantly second guessing that. And that's sort of a byproduct of what we're talking about. I'm going to jump in and just I want to apologize because I'm turning to a different screen to read a definition because I want to give, in case people aren't 100% sure what we're talking about. First of all, a couple of really important things that I learned writing about this. One is about 80% of um, creative people, artists, and high achievers suffer from some form of imposter syndrome. I thought that was a pretty interesting percentage. And then the other thing that I discovered is that it wasn't really formally identified, although the phenomenon has existed forever, obviously. It wasn't really formally identified as a psychological issue until 1978. Um, and what it is if you were in the honor college in college, if you were in the NHS in high school, if you were labeled as gifted as a child, you probably hear a critical voice. You doubt your skills and successes. You have feelings of persistent inadequacy and believing that your success is undeserved even when evidence, this is the key, even when evidence or objective observation tells you otherwise. And this is me, you may attribute your achievements to luck, external factors, and have a fear of being exposed as a fraud. I'm constantly afraid, no matter how many times I get up in front of a group or how many times I speak in front of students, I'm constantly afraid that I'm just one quote away from somebody saying he has no idea what he's talking about. And that really is imposter syndrome. Um, the one addition that I will make is we all struggle with it. We all work with it. We all work against it. We all use it to our ability. If it is to the point where it completely stifles your ability to move forward or be creative, that's a time when you might want to actually seek professional help and have a conversation with somebody about it. But other times it's one of those things that we go to work every day and we deal with and we try and figure out. So that's the definition.
And we're part of having this conversation is that we just want to highlight that it's something that so many people go through, especially artists in any sort of field. Like if you just read about other artists, like biographies and stuff, you're constantly coming across this. Like I was watching an interview with Gary Oldman, and he talks about how he's every single job he doubts himself. But it's just like you would think that some people would have moved past that, but it's just a constant voice inside your head. And I think learning to acknowledge it more as something when you're stepping outside of your comfort zone. It's actually good when you're hearing this voice because it means that you're pushing yourself a little bit further, and it's worth acknowledging it so that you can be like, yes, I understand the fear, but we're going to be doing this. Critic, you can come along with me. You're not going to drive this car. You're not going to prevent me from getting this done. But I acknowledge that you're there.
Something that really helped me and sort of shifted my view on it was, and I wish I could remember where I heard this, but it was likely a podcast, an interview where someone expressed that this is prevalent among artists, especially as you're getting started, because being an artist is about having an eye, not, and that's what drives you to the art, and then the skill builds along the way. So often you are not going to hit your own standards. And that is not because you are a failure, but that is because you are an artist. And that is what gives you the high standards. It's because you have the vision for what could be. And that is unique and special to you. And your growth is about hitting your own standards. It would be insane for you to be able to hit your own standards just starting out as you learn the skills. Or even 20 years later as you learn the skills. If you have that higher vision of what can be created and what perfection looks like, that's what makes you an artist. And not hitting that is just part of it. It's part of continually striving towards that next thing. And that certainly helped is a tool I use to reframe when I'm feeling that struggle.
Well, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead, please.
And I think that you and Larry both hit on that, the critical eye that you learn, right? As if you go through school, if you're apprenticing, if you're taught to have to defend your art, right? If you're doing fine art, right? You have to do art criticism. You have to stand up and say, I did this. These were the choices I made. This is why I did it. Even if we're doing theater, right? Every single time we have portfolio reviews with our students. Well, why'd you make that choice? Explain your choices to me, right? It's that constant rhetoric in your head. Okay, why am I doing this? Why am I making this choice? It's that self-reflection that oftentimes I think like you get stuck in that loop, right? Why am I doing this? Oh, is this good? Is this bad? And that good, bad, right? Not choice. I chose this because of X, Y, and Z. I think gets in the way sometimes, right? Rather than I made this choice based on this research, based on this reference. Is this good or is this bad? Creeps in because we're like taught to have to defend those choices, whether they're based in research, reality, or whatever. I like, I think we automatically go to the good, bad art rather than why am I doing this? Oh, for a reason. You know what I mean? Does that make sense?
I think
Yes.
there's also a feature of we're all kind of we all have sort of an ingrained humility. We're kind of taught to not talk about our own, to not brag, to not
Yep.
talk about our own work. And so subsequently, one of the things about any form of artistry, whether you're in a prop shop standing there and carving a medallion or, standing on a set arranging things, is it's singular. You don't make the decisions with a group of people. You make
Right.
decisions by yourself.
Right.
And so one of the first things that you do is you stand back and look at your work and go, right?
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
Pretty sure that's right, and you're never really 100% sure. And then you go and get somebody else and you're like, right?
Right?
And they're
Yeah.
like, oh, right. And so there's that natural doubt. One of the things that I sort of teach is, as an imposter, as somebody who I feel like, oh, they're gonna figure this out in a minute. They're gonna know I don't know what I'm talking about. Is to let that voice sort of be what drives you forward. Because, like Jesse mentioned, I at one point heard somebody make the description basically and say, we are all kind of raised to think um, that there are some sort of magic people out there who are natural artists, who are natural performers, who are natural musicians. And therefore, because I'm not a natural anything, there's something wrong. And the reality is there are no magical people. I mean, the anecdote that I use is I worked on the Antiques Roadshow, and watching the appraisers, what a lot of people don't realize is that what you see on television is the result of, first of all, possibly months of research, because the larger items are sent in photographically months before the show goes on so that they can research and decide whether or not they want to put them on. But the objects that show up on the day of and go to the green room and are then brought in for an appraiser, the appraiser's given several hours of research time before they go on TV. So when they jump in and go, well, this is obviously a Chippendale piece made in Philadelphia, they've spent some time figuring that out before they jump on TV. But the myth, and this happens with, sped up videos on social media, and it happens with lots of other things, is that somehow there's magic involved, and there really isn't. It's just persistence, creativity, research, and a lot of hard work. So,
Yeah. You got to remind yourself that these things that you're seeing on Instagram, where they like
Oh
something
yeah.
falls into their hand perfectly and whatever, it took them a lot of takes to get there.
Yeah.
There's a lot of editing involved. So I feel like for digital age, this is becoming more of an issue where we kind of feel like we need to be perfect automatically. And it's interesting because society, we sort of have these ideas of what artists are, and we on one hand like put artists on a pedal, like you were saying, Larry, like, oh, you have to be like naturally talented. Oh, I could never do art. But then on the other hand, we like devalue art, where it's like, well, that's not a legitimate career. Like you need to be a doctor or something. So it's a really weird duality as an artist to have this sort of undercurrent to how society views artists.
Well, and I think it's always important in theater to remember often I'm not meeting my own standards or what I want to be or what I wish I could be. And that's not about me as an artist. And it's very important in this world, in this specific place we are working, to separate the logistical conversations from the artistic conversations. There are times that I can't meet my own standards, and it's not because I'm good enough, not good enough.
Mhm.
It is because I am making art on a schedule within a budget.
Right.
And those logistical constraints are real and they have nothing to do with my skill. I can't do impossible things. I can prioritize. I can have really strong conversations with all of my collaborators to decide what moment do we want to just nail it and what moments are we going to let go. Um, there's all sorts of ways to do that and make it a conversation that becomes about logistics and not about your own skills, because in the end it's really not. It's
well, and I think that that's the other thing, is that it's a practical art. I mean, what we're doing is a practical art. We're not doing art for art's sake. We're doing art to roll on stage and serve a purpose. And one of the stories that I tell that goes way back to one of my very first jobs was building this gigantic Queen Victoria puppet for the La Jolla Playhouse for a brand new musical, as they're wont to do, and getting into like the fifth preview, having after a rehearsal, having the director ask, "Is this working for anybody?" Talking about the entire number, and the house was silent, and so there this gigantic Queen Victoria puppet got rolled off stage onto the loading dock and into a dumpster, and we basically salvaged the casters and fabric off of it and walked away. And it's like, you are not your art, and your art is not you. This is a practical thing, and if it doesn't work, it doesn't work, and it doesn't matter how much you love it. If it's wrong, it's just wrong. So yeah, that's one of the real challenges. And of course, the big giant anvil falling out of any window for a props person is the budget. Is like, I can do anything if you throw a suitcase of money at it, but that doesn't necessarily create time either. So
Well, and I think that that's really true, Larry. I think oftentimes, people think the solution is money, and it's not always money, right? I think, oops, sorry, my dog is upset. It is raining outside. Um, I think oftentimes it's hard to justify, especially in an academic setting, where we talk a lot about um, making sure there are opportunities for students to learn, and letting them have those learning growth moments, um, and allowing things to fail, right? Sometimes, not all the time, but like sometimes we have to let them have that moment of learning, you know, whether or not that's possible. It's not possible in real, regional theater, professional theaters, right? But there are these moments where I don't have the skill set is a real thing because I am one person and I don't have time to teach this particular welding course, or I don't have time to teach a joinery project right now because we're doing 12 shows, right? So I mean, sometimes it really is skill juggling. Who do you have apprenticing under you that year? Do you have the help to do that? Yeah. So I don't think money's always the answer, but I think people feel like money's always the answer.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
Time
it's
Yeah.
is a huge
Time's
thing.
huge. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
it's actually worse as you sort of move up into
Yeah.
larger venues that there's this whole mindset that's like, why can't you do it? We've given you all this money. And it's like,
Right.
because you can't invent more hours in the day.
Right.
But again, it's also one of those struggles where you sort of internalize that and you're like, what did I do wrong that they're
Yeah.
Yeah.
now
Why
asking?
or why can't I? Why
Right.
can't I?
They're
Right? Why
offering me
can't I
this.
do it?
Why shouldn't I be able to do
Yeah.
this? It's also funny. I just worked on a production where we tried something that everybody is going to hate us for because it's probably going to get picked up and used. But we did this thing where we did an art gallery where we framed flat screen monitors and
Mm.
actually put images into the monitors digitally.
Mm.
And then I had actually a director in the presence of the production manager say, would it be possible to make it so there's snow falling in that image? And it went from being a still image to being animation. And I could have murdered the well, not me, but the production manager stood mute and nodded at me, and I'm like, "What are you talking about? No, we can't do animation. Like I don't possess that skill set. We don't have the time, and no, I don't have time to go out and find somebody who can." And it was just one of those ridiculous things where it's like we've jumped through this massive hoop and given you these things, and now we want to take it one step further. So that's the other thing. But again, it's one of those things where I went home and sat down and stared at the still image and actually ran through in my mind the different ways I could figure out to animate it before I shut the computer off and went to bed because it's like, no, we're not doing that, you know.
Yeah. I think that for people starting out, it's particularly it's a skill to be able to assess what's being asked of you and to know like if you can because often we think we can get stuff done in a shorter amount of time than it actually takes. It always takes longer than you think it will. Um, and I feel like constantly oh, I thought I gave myself enough time for this, but then you run into issues, and so it's like trying to know that on the at the beginning, so that when people are asking these things of you, you can kind of tell them, well, we could do this, but we can't do this. If you want this, we need to bring in three overhire to get it done. Like it's a real hard thing to be able to assess from the off, without being in it, like what it really is going to require and try to anticipate any sort of issues that might come up along the way.
Well, and being honest with yourself, right? And honest with
Yeah.
the people you're working with about what your skill set really is, especially when you're starting out, what your capacity is, right? What your knowledge level actually is, so that you're not setting people up for, or yourself really for failure. Being able to, I guess, gauge that early career is hard.
Hmm. Yeah,
Uh,
we're constantly as props people talking about like how do you express to the team that you need things at a certain time
Yeah.
because stuff isn't going to go completely smoothly and you can't
Hmm.
predict everything that's going to come up and you need to have the time to be able to address it as things happen.
Hmm.
And so while you may not be thinking about the show 6 months out, I kind of need to know what world we're living in so that
Right.
I can be hitting those deadlines that I need to hit.
Right, and that's actually one of the things. All of these things kind of heighten the imposter syndrome because you find yourself going, am I not being understood? Did I not say this properly?
Absolutely.
Or, and this is another huge one, it goes along with the whole not wanting to brag. We're all taught not to say no. We're
Hmm.
all taught
Mhm.
to, and so one of the things that I have kind of worked on is figuring out a way to creatively say no in a way that you don't know you're being told no. But it's like, saying things like interesting. I really like to explore that, but I can't really promise anything. That's the first thing. And I happened to glance into the chat and I saw one of the questions about what happens if you have a director or someone who wants to
Yeah.
give final approval on everything. And I have noticed it's a relatively recent development, probably in the past 10 years, but there is that sort of myth that the director is the overlord and can therefore, make demands. And one of the things that I hear from young undergrads coming into a program is when they're talking about high school, the phrase, my director wanted this and my director wanted that. And one of the things that I try and deal with my managing voices is this is not a Burger King window. You can't shout orders through it. Like we have to figure out a way to convince people that my job is not just checking things off of a list. My job is actually creatively doing something, and I need materials to do it. I need time to do it. I need information to do it. And then I really need everybody around me to kind of shut the hell up and stop trying to give me ideas and just let me manage this. And that's the other thing is one of the things that contributes to that imposter syndrome is the fear that we're not trusted enough to be left alone with sharp instruments. So, yeah.
Yeah, something I've found as I have spoken to directors and designers is that we've entered a phase where there's a little bit of what I've started to call a mismatch in no training. Um, in a lot of design programs, in a lot of directing programs, directors and designers are encouraged to throw anything out. They are told, just give them your wildest ideas, even if it's crazy, even if it's weird. If they can't do it, they'll tell you no. That's their job. But on the other side, the artisans, the staff at the theaters, a lot of us are told, or those directors are treated like every request is important, every scenic designer's note is important, every suggestion is important. And so I have often found when we get down to those discussions that they'll throw out an idea, I will treat it as if it's wildly important and beat myself up trying to make it happen, only to later find out like they were like, oh, it was just an idea, it was just a thought, I just threw it out there, not a big deal, how else can we make that moment happen? So I think it's worth remembering that these are your collaborators. And even if the hierarchy has been set up in a weird way to make you feel otherwise, if you assert yourself by treating those designers and directors as collaborators, you will often find they are ready to treat you that way back. But you have to do that first. If you are taking every word they say as gospel, as a need, not a suggestion, a request, a
Mhm.
thought, it can become really overwhelming really fast. And they may not be thinking about it that way.
Yeah, you
Well,
have the
sorry.
whole
Yeah.
like you have a whole list, a whole show of stuff that you're juggling, like what needs to
Yeah.
be buy, what needs to be built, what's like what's our skill, and they're just thinking about that thing in the moment. And so being able to be like, okay, I hear what you're saying. It's a cool idea. We have all these other things that we're trying to get done. Do you want to are we willing to sacrifice these other things in order to accomplish this thing? It's like you're there, to support them, but also you're being realistic about what your timeline is, what your budget is, like what you can accomplish, and there has to be some sacrifice if they decided there has to be this element, magic thing that has to happen. Well, okay, are we willing to let these other things go? And sometimes if you just say, okay, well, it's going to require this much to do that, they're kind of like, oh, I didn't really realize that it would be that much.
Yeah.
Okay, maybe we don't
Right.
need it.
And sorry, go ahead, Larry.
No, you go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was gonna say a phrase I like if we're at the 11th hour and we have this big idea, a phrase I've taught myself, right, to use with directors like that is, how does this further the story at this point? Have we not made this moment successful with what we have? How is this furthering the story? Right? Or if they come out of the gate with a crazy ask, right? How is this adding to what is already there? How are we furthering the story? What is this doing? Is there another way we could tell that part of the story? You know what I mean? And redirect. I train my students, Larry, to say, that's a great thought. Let me do some research on that and I'll get back to you. Right?
Yeah, and
And
that's
it's not a no. It's not a
right.
shutdown, right? Because a
It's never
no,
no, it's yes and
I think a
or
no shuts down the conversation, right?
it's really funny. I ran a nonprofit for a period of time, and one of the executives who was part of the nonprofit's board she was a former vice president of a company,
Mm.
and she was very funny because her favorite way, I could tell when I was in a meeting with her that she wanted to say no, but she wasn't going to, was she would do this. She would go, interesting. And it makes people, it's like, okay, so they're listening to me,
Hmm.
yay. And that's all they really need. But yeah, there is that mistake, that communication error sometimes that we hear, getting back to something that Jesse said about directors just throwing spaghetti at the wall and seeing what
Yeah.
sticks, is they think they're just throwing spaghetti at the wall, and we think they're making serious asks. And we have to figure out a way to glean out what are the serious asks versus um, just harebrained schemes, number one. And number two, that research that somebody in spam did a couple of years ago where they polled actual living playwrights. And one of the things that started to happen recently with playwriting is it's become increasingly cinematic in its description of things. I know that something about that came up with She Kills Monsters. The idea that
Hmm.
the descriptions were incredibly detailed, but it's like, okay, and how do we do that? And what was interesting was that the response that came from many of the playwrights was, oh, well, I was just writing something to sort of suggest an idea, but I wasn't saying that that was necessarily the recipe for the soup. And it's getting people to look at things with a critical eye and recognize I'm not deficient here because I'm asking questions. I'm actually asking the questions that need to be asked to move the narrative forward. And get it and sort of drawing it back to imposter syndrome, that whole thing of I'm not crazy when I look
Right.
at, you know, Mary comes on stage with a bag containing 1,000 live fish. I'm not crazy, and when I look at that and go, really, 1,000? Like, and that's a question we have to ask.
Right.
Yeah.
I
Yeah,
like
and I
to
think,
go ahead.
oh, I was just gonna say like what you were saying about taking a moment and being like, okay, let me think about that. I'll get back to you. It's okay to say, I need to process this. Because lots of times when you're asked this in the moment, it's hard to like come up with the response and think of all the things, and you kind of feel like you need have an answer right then and there. And I've struggled throughout my career because I'm a very empathetic person and I'm also very sensitive, so I'm a crier. So like, when I feel like I'm not doing, my best, I get emotional and like, we're sort of it's weird as artists, we're told to kind of put our soul out there when we create art, but then at the same time it's like, oh well, you need to have a thick skin and you shouldn't take it personally. And so it's trying to navigate that, and often just being able to be like, okay, let me have a moment to process this and I'll get back to you can be really helpful.
I think it's important to remember that you're not the only one in the room with the imposter syndrome. The director has it, the set designer has it, the stage manager has it, the actor has it, and it can hurt. Like if you say it the wrong way, that what I've had a moment where someone asked me for for something, and I went, and it took me a second to realize that mine was, oh my god, do you know what the price of steel is right now? But what they heard was me laughing at their idea. And so I think sometimes bringing in that sense of humor about it. One of my favorite ways to do it is the phrase I'll use often is like, "Oh my gosh, that would be amazing." When it transfers to Broadway, we should totally do that. Like, given our time and budget, like, how do we capture that moment? Let's keep the artistic conversation going, and remember that them throwing out that idea may be a sensitive moment for them too. We've talked about how we all have it, how some of the greatest, directors, designers, artists, you'll hear their interviews and they're having it. It doesn't exist at any level. So making sure that like as you're having empathy for yourself, part of the pushback you're getting may be defensiveness because someone else is feeling raw and unsure of themselves and scared to put forward an idea. And so they throw it out with confidence that they might not actually have.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think like talking about ways to live with the imposter syndrome and this inner critic in your head because it's not going away. It's like how do okay, we acknowledge that's there, but then how do we not let it stop us from doing things? And one of the things we talked about is like the fact that we internalize all of our failures, but we like externalize success. So it's like, oh, well, I just got lucky that time, or like, oh, it just kind of worked out, or, but then when something doesn't go right, it's like, oh, it's all my fault. And we've talked about how there's so many different factors. And so being able to acknowledge your strengths and sort of celebrate yourself as an artist, understand that when you hit these points, it's not a reflection on you personally as an artist, and it's a learning experience. Like we, particularly in props, but in theater in general, every show requires something different. Like you could have made a fake chicken a million times, but this show needs it in a very specific way that is very different than you've ever done a fake chicken. So just sort of acknowledging that there's always going to be learning moments, and kind of approaching those with curiosity and be like, oh, well, this, I've never tried it this way before. Like, okay, I need to factor in some research and development time to like test out a few different products and see what's going to work the best. And there's going to be some failures along the way. But this is just another thing I'm learning. Or if something doesn't go right, you're like, okay, that didn't work. I learned these things about this that I will apply next time, and I can move on to the next project. What do you guys think?
Patrick just put in the chat, to succeed, I surround myself with people smarter than me, and that's 1,000% right. Right? You
Yeah,
can't
that
possibly
was
know everything.
that very first job that I mentioned where we rolled the puppet into the dumpster.
Mhm.
Cheryl Riggins, that was at the La Jolla Playhouse. Cheryl Riggins was the prop master at the time, and she articulated that exactly. She's like, I'm just good at assembling people who are better than I am and motivating them to be better than I am. And I think that that's one of the big things about propping. But to sort of key off of something that I think Sarah just said, um, um, the constant urge to believe that we dodged a bullet, managed to pull it off one more time is, I mean, I said it to a friend of mine as a joke, but I was telling somebody I know that I was coming coming here to do this seminar on imposter syndrome, and one of the things that I said was, hopefully they don't all figure out that I don't know what I'm talking about. I mean, it's
Yeah.
just that natural thing, and I have to remember. I'm just going to tell a quick story, but my mom loved to cook and was a really good cook, and anytime and she was also this is Monique Walker, one of the charter members of Spam, has always said this. She's from Iowa and I'm originally from Illinois. And she said, we're too Midwestern. We're unwilling to take credit for what we do right. And in a very Midwestern way, anytime anybody complimented my mom on her cooking, she would take a moment and explain to them all the things that she had done wrong while she was making it. And it's like, that's one of the things. Anytime somebody comes into the theater, and you've just manufactured a T-Rex skeleton for on the town that is spring-loaded so that it falls apart on cue, and they go, "Wow, that is really amazing." You want to explain to them, "Oh man, I broke that leg bone like 9 times, and I was convinced this was never going to work, and I still don't think it's going to work." And they're like standing there and looking at you and slowly beginning to gather their things up because they're afraid, you're gonna have some sort of breakdown in front of them. But it's one of those things, we tend to be self-deprecating, and I think that that's a product of this syndrome, this unwillingness, this being completely uncomfortable with the idea that maybe actually are successful at what we're doing.
Yeah, and that process. I think it's always process, and it's never. I call it like in sketching, we call it the messy middle, where you like start out with the sketch and you're kind of like, oh, this is, and then you get in the middle of it and you're like, oh, I ruined it. Like, what did I do? This is crap. And then you just kind of keep adding, and then at the end you're like, oh, this kind of looks okay. Like you come through the other side, and I gotta say this is like the process of painting marble. Like it doesn't look like marble until like the last step. There's like all these layers, and the whole time you're like, oh, I'm not doing this right. Like it's not looking right. And then you add the last step, and it just melds all the layers together, and you're like, oh, it does look like marble. So you have to sort of trust the process, and that you can try different things. You can, when you hit a wall, be like, okay, well, this isn't working. Like, what else can I do? And being able to sort of pivot and kind of flow with it, and be along for the ride, and not give up the moment something doesn't go right.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing, is that sort of chaos where you're standing there and rocking back and forth like, okay, this is not going the way I expected it to go, or wow, that last layer of gray was a huge mistake, or whatever. And one of the things that I learned sort of early on is, when that happens, step back, squint your eyes, and look at it, and then come back to it. But yeah, I mean, there are so many memes and cartoons, but there's a meme that's probably like a 4-panel cartoon, and it's like the design process, where it's like procrastination, and then you sit down and you start to draw, and the thought bubble is, oh my God, this is terrible. And then, another thought bubble, it's only getting worse. And then the image of the person like curled up in the fetal position underneath the drafting table, like, why did I ever think I could do this? And then, oh, this isn't so bad, and then there, I'm done, and it looks great. And
Mhm.
it's like the same process every single time,
Yeah.
and we don't even realize that that's our process. But it's also that thing where, um you think about it, when you take drawing classes, the first 5 to 10 minutes of the class is warming up and tearing paper
Hmm.
off and throwing it on the floor, and tearing paper off and throwing it on the floor. And you wonder why, like the Whitney Museum of American Art has 2,500 Edward Hopper paintings, but they only have 5 exhibited. And it's because he was a maniac. He painted and tested and tried and sketched before he came up with something that he liked.
Hmm.
So it's just the natural process. We kind of force ourselves to create.
Yeah,
Well,
and it's okay to ask for help. Like if you hit something and you're like, I don't know how to do this, You can ask other people in your, it's great because we often have multiple people in our shop. We can be like, hey, can you put eyes on this? You can ask other people, other departments. Oh, okay, costume department, I'm not that great with sewing. Like, how would you do this? Or you can spam is such a great resource, whether you're an official member and part of the Google chat that we have, or if you're on our Facebook group and you can put it out there and kind of get feedback from people and then kind of make a decision from there. So definitely not being afraid to ask the questions.
And we talked about previously when we met. Um, just taking that first step can be so debilitating when right, the procrastination step, because Larry told a story about, research, and like sometimes you just have to do something, regardless of it's whether right, wrong, good, bad, whatever it is. To start the project, you just have to start something. Plug in the hot glue gun, right? Get the modeling clay out, do something, and begin. And then you can figure out what you know, what you don't know, what direction this project needs to go. And that's honestly, yeah, I love that. That you just have to do that step, is that push out of
Yeah.
your
Yeah, try
head.
to build that into your schedule to
Yeah.
give yourself that time. And procrastination, knowing that the more you procrastinate, the harder it's going to be because you won't have that time to adjust. You just under the pressure of time constraints. So it's always better to get started now and not put it off because
Well,
then you'll have the time to address.
yeah, the procrastination turns it into sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy. It's like, I'm not going to be able to do this. It's not going to come out right. I shouldn't even start.
Yep.
I shouldn't even try. And then you start, and it's like, wow, if I had another 20 minutes, and it's like, well, that was
Right.
the 20 minutes that you spent telling yourself that you didn't know what you were doing. But
Mhm.
yeah, procrastination it's like one of the very first shop supervisors who I worked with as an undergraduate said, you got to be willing to make the first mistake. You got to be
Mhm.
willing to just walk in, turn on the saw, and run a piece of wood through it, and and be prepared to make the first mistake. But it's entirely possible you're not going to make a mistake, and it's going to be fine.
Mhm.
And you just have to sort of do that.
Mhm.
I think
I have
it's
a question from the
it's
chat, maybe, that there's somebody asking, well, how do you kind of deal with coming back to something that you've done before but haven't done in a long time, or coming back to some
Ooh.
skills and reminding yourself that you have done something before when you haven't done it in a long time?
I think having testing built in is nice and prototyping. Like if you have to make 15 of something, like getting one working and then you can replicate the process. I've definitely had moments where I just start mixing the full quantity of things and I get the mix wrong. And it's like, okay, do a pre-mix and make sure you got your color the way you want. And then you can make a full batch, once you have the recipe. So I constantly like welding is one of those things that if I step away from it, it's like, okay, I need a little bit of time with some scrap steel to just like
Yeah.
clean up my welds a little bit before I jump into the project. So I think coming back to a skill, acknowledging like, okay, it's been a second. Let me just warm up and find my feet again and remember some of these skills.
I think all power tools are like that for me, Sarah. Like if I haven't touched, right? If I haven't touched a bandsaw in a year or whatever, like I'm always like, okay, you've done this many, many times. You've taught safety courses on this. You can certainly use this tool proficiently and you'll be fine. But it's that you're right, it's that muscle. You have to flex it. Or, I go away for the summer every year. And then I come back and I start my lectures for the fall. And every time, first day of classes, I'm going to out myself. I'm nervous every single time. Every single time. So I'm sitting in my office beforehand and I'm going through my lectures. I'm going through my points, making sure, because obviously I don't want them to figure me out. Like Larry said, right? They're gonna know. They're gonna know,
Everybody's going to know that I don't know what I'm
right?
doing. I think Sarah's example, this actually, I mean, I had to weld. We did in the Heights, and I had to weld a Paragua cart because our designer had made it so that the entrance for the Piragua cart was only 18 inches wide or something
Wow.
ridiculous like that. And so I started out with scraps and just standing there because I mean, I actually did the math when I did it. And the TD came walking up and stood there and watched me do the welds. And he was like, "How long has it been since you've welded?" And I said, 26 years, and it's just one of those things where you sort of have to kind of trust the muscle memory, but you also have to be willing to pick up the welder, cut the steel, and lay it out and just use your tricks, make a jig and do all of that. But of course, I also have I have a son. I have a 28-year-old son who's a mechanical engineer and worked in the maker's shop at University of Texas while he was putting himself through school. And I sent him a picture of myself welding, and his response was, "Always remember, a grinder and paint makes you the welder you ain't." And I was
Yeah,
like, wow, I really raised you. I just
that's my foot
never.
rule.
But it's true. You just have to be willing to sort of it's that willingness to make the first mistake and to just say, look, I've done this before, so this can't be this complicated.
Yeah, and
But
it's like the charcoal drawings you were talking about. Fine
yeah,
artists, they warm up. And
yeah.
so
Yeah.
if it's been a second, like you can warm up
I've
to
done
do it
no
on
fewer
scratch.
than 5 shows that required a huge grouping of candlestick phones that I had to make using, whatever we use, yogurt cups and discs and PVC and all those things to turn it into a phone. And every time I do it, I'm like, how did I do this again? I know I
Yeah,
did
right.
this once before.
Swags are like that for me.
Those,
Every time
Yeah.
I'm
those
like, oh,
moments.
what's the formula? Okay,
Right?
got to do it in muslin first. Got my pattern. Okay.
Well, and every
And
time I feel like I do math for swags, I feel like I'm relearning the English language. It just something in my brain does not compute.
And anytime I have to do any form of shop math, it's like I want to go to somebody smarter than I am and go check this.
Right?
Yeah.
And they're
and
like,
I
Larry,
think we
it's
should discount the
45
going to
divided by
someone
9.
smarter a lot. I
Absolutely.
am always going back into my phone when you're getting back into the thing, when you're doing the thing you haven't done in years, and texting that person, be like, hey, it's Jesse. Remember
Right.
that show we did 6 years ago? What was the trick when we tried
Mhm.
to do that cool thing with the couch legs? And you will be shocked at how many people are ready to be like, oh my gosh, that was such a cool project. We did this, I think. It's so good to hear from you. Like, this is a community art and a collaborative art. And your community is not going to judge you for not knowing the things.
No,
Your community will be excited to talk to
no.
you.
Jesse, you mentioned working at the Goodman, and I worked at the Goodman way long ago when Alice was first starting out. And it's really funny because I still get calls from Alice, like, what was the name of that guy that we went to when we needed to blah 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 overnight? And it's like, and first of all, it's a great opportunity to catch up, but second of all, I mean, it's a boost for my ego because it's like she's calling me. Oh yeah, but it's also it gives you the opportunity to sort of flex that. Wow, I do remember, or I do understand, or I did come up with something that worked, or whatever. Going back to the person who asked, "How do you deal with it when you're coming back to it from a long time?" Is at some point you have to trust your history. You have to um, you have to trust. I did this once before. I'm going to fiddle around with it, and then I'm going to do it again. And it's just practice. It's allowing yourself privately, you know, to go out and ride a bike where you haven't ridden a bike in 20 years and you don't want
Yeah.
to get laughed at by people, so you do it on a dark street first. Do it alone by yourself in your shop to make sure that you remember the process so that you can then do it again. I don't try and teach anything that I haven't experimented with before I teach it, even if I've done it before.
hmm There's a question in the chat, sorry,
No, I think you might
about
be bringing up the same thing I am, Ashley.
yeah,
Great.
about do you have any advice on dealing with imposter syndrome when it comes to applying for jobs when you are starting out in your career?
My favorite advice for folks at the early part of their career is to remind yourself that while we may be working on a show together and I may have done 200 shows and you may have done 5, no one's done this show yet. We're sort of on a level playing field coming into this room. And all of us are going to be pulling tips and tricks and ideas from our previous knowledge. And maybe my previous knowledge of shows is bigger, but maybe the solution we need is coming from the random fact that you grew up with an uncle who was super into water skiing. And have you ever heard of this weird little thing? And you go, no, that's amazing.
Right.
Right.
Like, right. It's like learning a new knot. You're like, you stand there and you watch it happen. Like somebody has just invented the wheel and you're like, wait a minute, what? I mean, it's like there's this he's a mechanic, I think, and he's on Instagram and his name is something like what no way, where he sees somebody do something and then he goes what no way, and he walks into the shop and he picks up whatever the
Oh, I love
person
that
is
guy.
doing and he does it and then he goes, he's
Yeah.
completely blown away by it. But to get back to something else, one of the things that so in job interviews, one, you have to practice being able to talk comfortably about yourself.
Mhm.
Two, you have to eliminate the word just. This is just a little solution that we came up for, you know, cold fusion. It's like if you've come up with a solution for cold fusion, stop diminishing it and say what it is. So stop saying just. This was just something we tried and it worked and wow, and look at me, I'm not an idiot. Stop doing that to yourself. Stop talking yourself down. Become comfortable talking about what you're showing. And I'm not going to say believe in yourself because whatever. If we could believe in ourselves, we wouldn't have imposter syndrome. But I think that is one of those things. And then the other thing is control your portfolio, only show the things that you absolutely love, and only show the things that you absolutely love talking about. And also remember, this is super important. I am currently working on the 5th production of Cabaret that I've ever worked on. And every time, it's like nobody, riffing off of what Jesse said, nobody's done this production. Every time we do a show, we're recreating the world of the show. It's why I discourage people from looking at other people's productions of things. Like, who cares? Who the hell cares what the David Corins studio with his 25 assistants did? Nobody cares because we are going to do this time. So one of your goals should be to create something that is new, that is innovative, that is exciting, and doesn't look like anybody's production before. So even if you've done it before, that's another voice of imposter syndrome where you basically prove, I did it before, I'm going to do a different version of it, and it's going to be better.
Yeah, and I think just putting yourself out there, like don't let your doubts stop you from going for the job. Just be honest, be, be open to having that conversation about what you're excited about in the job. Like, because this is a field where you don't necessarily need to have gone to school for it to get into it. There's so much hands-on experience that you can easily just start working and kind of learn it as you're doing the work. And when I'm hiring new people, I'm always like my highest things are trying to see if I get a sense that they are curious and that they're willing to ask questions because that you can learn. You can make the mistakes and learn from your mistakes and add onto your skills. But if somebody is too afraid of failure that they don't even ask for help when they're having problems, that's where it's really hard to get the work done because it's like, well, I just need you to come and talk to me when you hit a problem. Like if you are too afraid to admit that you've hit a snare, then you just force yourself through the whole project and didn't address that issue and then it ends up wrong in the end. Now we're at the point where it's really hard to fix it and it would have been really easy just to be like, oh, okay, well, that's something I didn't anticipate when I gave you this project. Let's think about how we would address this. So yeah, be curious, ask questions, and don't let your own doubts stop you from going for those jobs, because you just need to put yourself out there, and don't lie on your resume or anything. Like, present yourself truthfully, and don't take it personally if you don't get the job, because there's a million applicants. You can't get it if you don't try.
Yeah. I'm watching the conversation that's sort of
Hmm.
scrolling in the chat, and I wanted to just address Hannah. Yeah, I one of my absolute pet peeves, and of course I'm old and I'm I can be a little cranky, and there are times where I'm just gonna look at somebody and go, whoa, 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 what are you asking me for? One of the This is a judgment thing, so don't anybody take it personally. One of the laziest pieces of blocking is having somebody sit, stand, or lean on a piece of furniture that you didn't originally intend to have somebody sit, stand, or lean on. And the simple fact of the matter is, as Jen McClure said, if you don't know it from the very beginning, it's entirely possible you're not going to be able to engineer a piece of furniture to be stood on. And that is not a failing, that is simply a factor of physics. But the other thing is, traditionally, the prop master is not the engineer in the room. The people who have the closest experience to engineering are the TDs. So if somebody comes to you and says, this needs to be reinforced so it can be stood on, what you need to do is you need to tap the people who know about standing on things. That's usually your technical director, ATD, and carpentry team, and figure things out like that. But yeah, I mean, they wanted to skitter a frickin' Shay's Lounge across the stage in the show, The Play That Goes Wrong. And I had given them this thing with really beautiful, slender legs that couldn't be skittered across the stage. And I brought it to the TD team and I said, what can you do for me? And they actually welded a substructure and built it onto the bottom of the thing. And it's like, when I thanked them, they were like, that's what we do. So yeah, you can't be afraid to like as a props person, you are the center of the room surrounded by experts. Let the experts be experts and let them help you. And there is a point at which you say, I'm really sorry, we can't engineer this to be stood on, but I can get you a couple of options that can
Right.
be stood on. And honestly, that's a teachable moment for a director or anybody else when that happens, to say to the director, I really needed to know about this like the minute it happened, not as we were going into tech.
Yeah.
So yeah,
And
there's a
and
point at
you are
which your inner voice is going to tell you that you're wrong, and the
Right.
reality is you're not wrong. You're sane and you're wired into the universe.
and
So
that asking for help, it goes both ways, as Jen
Mm.
sort of said. Like, yes, sometimes I need help, welding help from the technical direction team, but sometimes they have a soft good that they need my help with,
Hmm.
or they have, a tree that is supposed to be scenic, and they're going, and I go, oh, no, 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 I've got an idea. Let's work on that together. And it's a give and take, because we are a team. And
Hmm.
and part of making the team is your job. And sometimes the best way to make the team is to be the first one to ask for help, because that gives someone else permission to ask for help, and that gives someone else permission to ask for help, and suddenly everyone's using each other's skills. If everyone is trying to project that they know all the things and they don't need help, then everyone is suffering in their tiny little circle, their silo, trying to
Right.
figure it out on
right.
their own, when the
And
help is down
that's
the
Yeah.
hall.
Yeah, I mean, the two things. One, don't be self-defeating and saying, "Well, I really don't want to waste your time." You won't you won't know if you're wasting their time until you ask them, number one. And number two, you have no idea. Like if you ask them, you may be asking them to do something that's literally like stapling a packet for them, but it would take you 2 days to do. And honestly, this is one of my favorite things. My biggest trade-off is I'm really bad with upholstery, but very early on, I taught myself to use an industrial sewing machine going full speed. And so it's really a good trade-off, because when they realize, wait a minute, Larry can hem a stage width curtain in like 15 minutes. going full speed on it. All he needs is a good machine.
Hmm.
That's one of those things where it's like your superpower. You're like, I can do that. Here, what if I do that for you? Can you please go drill holes in these legs and put steel rods into them so I don't have to hear this director again or whatever? And
Hmm.
again, you have no idea um, what they are or aren't willing to do. Um, in terms of um, if you're always waiting for answers, Hannah, I'm just going sort of scrolling down your things. So first of all, a Gantt chart. If you don't know what it is, learn it and use it because it's a good thing to share with a TD and a stage manager where it's like, dear stage management, if I don't get this answer, you're not going to get this object, and I can't be held responsible for information you didn't give me. It's just a zero sum equation. It's one of those things where it's like you have to be willing to say this is not my failing. This is a lack of communication. Thank you for that spelling, Jen, because so many people get them wrong. But they're great. And I didn't learn about it again until I was running this nonprofit. And somebody said to me, how long is this going to take to do? And I gave some very vague answer. And then somebody else sent me a link to how to build a Gantt chart. And I was able to give a very specific answer
I
to it.
haven't heard of a Gantt chart. I'm excited to look
It's
this
a
up
it's a
now.
workflow thing where you
Okay.
basically you take a process and you project how many hours, minutes, however long it's going to take to do each thing so that you can get a layout on a calendar of, we're 2 weeks away from having this done and we're already at a week and a half
Mhm.
where you haven't given me information.
Well, and I think that that's important. I like the Gantt chart because you can actually plug and play how long it'll take me to do something as opposed to how long it'll take an undergrad to do something, right? Or an apprentice level, right? To do something. And
Right.
being able to show that physically, right? Some people are really visual learners, Larry. I like them. I think they're great, especially when showing, yeah, I can do that in a week. But a student is probably going to take longer because they have classes, right? We're in the shop for 4 hours a day. So they're not working 24
Right.
hours, right? They're not working a full 8 hour shift to build this thing.
I
So,
had
yeah,
a humbling experience where I was talking to another design professor, and I said something like, I mean, the reality of it is, that's like total a day and a half of drafting. And they sort of looked at me. I saw them in the Zoom, and they were looking at me, and I was like, what? And they were like, that's a day and a half of drafting for you. That's like
right,
2 or 3 days of drafting for other people. And I'm
right,
like, oh, well, okay,
right.
but yeah, honestly, Hannah, one of my favorite quotes is the greatest myth about communication is that it's happening at all. And so sometimes you have to get outside your comfort zone and you have to become a nuisance. You have to be the person who says, you know, as per our previous conversation, I need this information now. And yeah, what Kelly said, in the land of cell phone cameras, we should be able to communicate about choices quickly. Takes a lot of take a lot of process photos, send it to a director, and ask them for their stuff. And if they're not responding, or if they're not um, answering, or if they're saying you're asking me too many times,
Mm.
um, then at some point you have to make a
Yeah,
decision.
definitely follow up. If you haven't heard from them, it's okay
Yeah,
to keep asking
if you
because
haven't followed up, but
email shit gets lost in the email all the time. So
if you
it's like,
haven't followed up and they're not answering your questions, you got to do what you need to do to complete the job, and that's just the way it is.
Yeah. I want to be mindful of everybody's time. It's about 10 after 9. Are there any other final, like one more final question or anything for our panelists? As the production calendar gets developed, does anyone else ask for a no new props date? This is a fun thing that we often
I
talk about.
know.
So how do we feel about potentially an end date that isn't closing?
That's
We talk about this all the time. It's like I love the
Hmm.
idea of it. Lots of times people don't honor it,
Yeah.
but it's nice to have in place so that there's at least at least they know this. So then if something comes up, it's like, oh, I know that we're past this time, but like,
Right.
can we get this accomplished? Some people have said sometimes it deters people from asking for things. So trying to make sure that
Yeah.
they feel that it's like you can ask for it, but after this date, you have to acknowledge that
Yeah.
it might not be possible.
The way I have done it, and I did it for 10 years this way at Oklahoma City University, and it was built in by the production manager. But 2 weeks before tech, we do a on the Monday, the week before tech, we do a
Hmm.
props walk with the director where we show them the progress of everything that we've got so that they can lay eyes on it. And it's everything. I mean, it is everything from pencils to champagne buckets to, exploding dinosaurs. I mean, everything. And then the props cutoff is that Tuesday. And there are two things. I'm going to sound like a jerk here, but if something deters somebody from asking for something, that's not my problem. I'm really sorry, but you
Yeah.
know, grow up and ask for it. And if we need to say no, we'll say no. Number one. And number two, the props cutoff, the hard cutoff at midnight on that Monday is basically the day after which, if you ask for something, it's going on a we will do it if we can list.
Hmm.
It's
Mhm.
not a hard no. It's
Right.
just you can't add a severed head a week before tech if you want me to get everything else for the show done. And
Yeah.
that's not me being a jerk. That's me living in the reality of the time frame. So yeah, if they're going to continue to try and add things right up until the very last minute, they're going to be disappointed, and that can't and you have to you may as a props person, if they don't build it into the calendar, it might be something that you introduce into the meeting before your target cutoff date. You might say, I'd like to address this and request that we not add anything more after this coming Monday.
We
And
have a we have oh
just
sorry.
yeah, just speak your truth.
We have a big ad date, right? Like no more big ads 2 weeks out, right? If we have it, or it's a quick buy, or it's a quick build, you can have it. And yeah, Larry, it's not a no. It's a it goes on that secondary list because we still have to finish the show as we said we would. So,
Yeah,
but yeah, it's the big ad, right? No, you can't have seven dancing ponies. No, you
right.
can't have, right? But if you want a handbag or a cane, yeah, I can go grab a cane. I have a cane in stock. I'll
Yeah,
go
if
grab
you
it.
want a
Sure.
choice of poison bottles
Right.
for Juliet, yes, we'll give you
Right.
three or
Right.
whatever. But it's funny, Ashley. So that production manager who built the hard cutoff in, he was as sarcastic with me as I am with other people, and he said, it's not a no, it's Larry doing this. And so
I
yeah,
got to
it's
have those
it's
up.
not a no, it's a really.
Well, and
Really? That's what you're going to ask me for now? And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. And there are some directors who are absolutely fearless and couldn't care less. And
Well,
they'll
they're gonna
take their
ask,
hits.
right? I
and
have I have one director that I work with who will always ask, and I know that that's what they're going to do every single time, knowing that I will probably say no, and he's cool with that,
Yeah.
right? We have a working relationship at this point where he's gonna say, "Can I have this thing?" And I'm gonna say, "Probably not, but you can have
Right.
this thing,"
I worked
right?
with a director who used to like to add magic tricks at the last minute. And it's like, seriously, I'm going to come to the theater and push you into the pit. You know, we're not adding magic tricks,
well,
unless
and
we absolutely have nothing but time on our hands.
I try to keep us on the same team when we're doing that. One of the things I will say to a director, and I'll often say it at the beginning of the process and get us on the same page so that we can reiterate it over the course of the process, is like, you can ask me whatever you want. If the choice is between giving you, I used to say the dollar store version of the item or pulling it off well with something we could be proud of, I would rather, if I can give you the dollar store one or say no, I'm going to say no. We're not going to put something on stage that you're going to hate and I'm going to hate.
Well,
Mhm.
or put something on stage that doesn't look like it fits because you've worked on everything else.
Yeah.
Or try to pull off a trick at the last minute that you haven't R&D'd, or you know what I mean? And then you're in tech and everyone's just frustrated because the thing that just got added hasn't had time. You haven't had time to make it work,
Yeah.
you know?
You're wasting the time for other things
If
Yeah.
I
by
can add
spending
just
all the time on it.
one more thing about the imposter syndrome is like in these meetings and in these places, if you haven't figured out about my demeanor and my approach to thing is approach everything positively and as lightheartedly as you can. I mean, be whimsical, be fun, be smiling and say, look, I'm going to do everything I can to make everything that you want work, but there's also just reality. But if you approach it like if you don't constantly lead with no and then suddenly you say no, everybody's going to go, okay, normally Larry's pretty okay with this and he just said no, so that must mean no.
Yeah.
And it gives a little bit of weight to your stuff if you're the easiest person in the room to begin with. And then towards the end, you start, Dean, to your point, start saying, I'm really sorry, but I don't think this is going to happen. You're managing expectations. You're breaking people's falls. So, okay, I feel like I need to shut up now. So I'm going to
No,
shut
wonderful.
up.
Thank you all. This has been an incredible conversation. You can tell that it's something that we're all very passionate about and have a lot of opinions and pick anybody's brain and they'll talk for hours about this. So thank you so much all for joining us tonight. We hope that we've given you a few tools that you can use to maybe combat imposter syndrome. We have more spaminars in the works, so keep an eye out for some announcements, and we'll definitely keep those topic suggestions coming for us. We want to hear what you all want to learn about more. If you're a working prop manager in nonprofit theater, opera, children's theater, or an educator teaching props, we'd love to have you join SPAM. Just head over to our website and click the link in the chat to sign up, or click the link in the chat to sign up. You can also find us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. We're going to put some links in the chat for that as well. And a big shout out to Spam and our amazing members who make these sessions happen: Patrick Drone, Freed, Ben Homan, Nikki Kulas, Amy Peter, Sarah Pugh, Karen Robbie, and myself. Thanks so much again for joining us. Prop on, everybody. We'll see you next time. Thanks.